Hi everyone, welcome to TriEssence martial art channel, Kung Fu Debunked. We're going to talk about Mantis again. So in the last episode, we basically looked at whether or not Mantis is more striking based or chin-na and throwing based. Right? I think the verdict is pretty obvious that Mantis is at least about 70% striking with some chin-na and throw as supplement. It's definitely not a throw and joint locking predominant style. Now after I uploaded that video, I've got some people messaging me asking that they, after watching that video, they think Mantis is really good and they wonder why I think Mantis isn't that good and moved on to internal styles. So this video is basically me trying to address that question. And to do so, we're going to apply Occam's razor. Right? If you don't know what that is, you can Google it. It basically means that the simplest solution is usually the most correct one. The more complex the solution is to a problem, the more likely it's going to go wrong at some point, and for the whole system for the whole solution to fall apart. So the simpler the better, and that's very true for Chinese martial art. Before we start, I'd just like to clarify that I'm only addressing the Mantis that I've learned from my Mantis teacher. I'm not addressing all the Mantis in the world. So if your Mantis does a different thing than mine and using yours work, that's good for you, but you don't have to tell me because or form an argument against my video because that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying all Mantis are bad. I'm just saying the Mantis that I've learned, the application that I've learned, I believe it is not as optimal as the other styles that I later on moved on to. And I'm purely here to look at it from a logical perspective, and hopefully through doing this analyzation, also let you see the logic process when you look at any application. So hopefully in the future, you can also be able to do this yourself, right? Look at the martial arts application and be able to tell if it's going to work in a real life situation or not. So again, to clarify, I'm only talking about the Mantis I've learned. The application, the move might be different from the ones you learn, which is perfectly fine. I'm not talking about any other Mantis except my own learning that I've practiced. Alright, so we're going to look at the form again, 摘要, first form, but we're also going to talk about some other techniques, in general to just illustrate the point. So the first one, I'm going to just quickly demonstrate again. So it's here, there, yeah, 匕首 punch, 勾手 punch, 反背锤, right? So that's the first theory of move. So the first block is like this, and it's intended for when he punches me to do this. Now this block in itself is actually fine, with the only problem being that this block works well when the guy doesn't pull back his punch. Maybe punching like like the old way karate punch or whatever the case. When he doesn't pull it back, then then this one can kind of pull him out to the side, which will allow me to do a counter punch back. But if you were to do a punch where he pull back, then even if I catch him, right? So let me catch him, but pull it back afterwards. You see, you don't have that same control. It's not like when he does a hard punch like in traditional martial art back in the days, karate, etc. That allow me to then divert that to the side and enough time to do a follow-up punch. If he just come here doing this, even if I catch him, it doesn't actually have that same control, and that is a problem when you're fighting against more modernized combat like boxing. But this block itself is not. It's not like it doesn't work. It works only in specific situation. If a boxer, do a jab and a hard cross, and if you can somehow catch that, then it can work. All right. The next one, so it's here, and then you do a punch here. The problem with that is in the form of you do here, and you pull this fist to the waist, and that's a common thing in a lot of traditional martial arts. And the problem here is that you are putting your hand in a position that you're not protecting yourself, and you're not really fast enough to launch a strike. Over here to strike is actually a bit slow. So the problem to that is it becomes quite predictable. If you're holding your hands here, you can only kind of strike from here. There's very little room for you. You can't do a lot of other things. So it's easy to predict what you're about to do when your hand are here. But this is a very common thing in traditional Chinese martial arts. I know that in modern day, most of people don't fight like this anymore, but they have a more modern combat stance. But the problem to that is it kind of changes a lot of the technique and how it's launched. For example, if I'm here and I do this, it's easier and more flowing than if I'm like doing this and I want to do that. Like, you know, after this, do I keep my hand here and then punch, or do I pull it back? I pull it back, that's not good. But if I just I keep it here and then what, I'm going to punch there, it's kind of awkward. It's not that it doesn't work, but it's kind of awkward. Which is why you have to realize that back in the day where people actually prefer to hold the hand here, a lot of the technique works better than when you try to take those same technique and apply it in this kind of range. Which is why I keep saying a lot of the old traditional martial arts stuff is kind of outdated. Now the next thing, from here, you pull this back, followed by another punch. And this is a big problem, because from here, I punch and assuming he blocks here. And assuming that he blocks here and doesn't over push me and doesn't tap me. And only in that situation can I pull this back and punch in there. And assuming that hand doesn't pull back and then do it again. If this hand pulls back and punch again, then pull this back and punch again. Yeah. Then you're kind of trading punches because you're not really controlling this hand. And the other problem is if he keeps his hand here, but he pushed too far, then you kind of can't do that. Or if you tap the hand, right? And then you see you kind of can't do this. So this only works when he's making soft contact, which is something that the Ma family Mantis likes to do, but that doesn't mean everyone else does this. So this is another problem, that this only works when he is, when you do a punch, right? When he's doing this to you. If he's pushing this way, you're very hard to pull it back. And if he's just doing that, because of the sudden impact, yeah, I already disconnected, so he can't really pull my hand. So this technique is actually very limiting. When you, especially, you can try this against a boxer, you almost have no chance of pulling this off. He will just throw punches and disconnect the whole time. The third one, from here, there. So this one actually can work. It's one of the things that I sometimes don't use. Basically, whether from this position I just change position, or he just throws a punch. You kind of can do this, so this does work. Only slight problem to this is this punch's power is kind of limiting. Because you have limited range, you can only go this far. If you go any further, you kind of lose power. So you can only hit here. So it's more of a flick. But given the backhand, the knuckles, and to the head, it will still hurt. But it's not something that you can drop a person by. Unless you're really lucky, you catch him on the jaw, maybe, right? And he's not very resilient on the jaw. But overall, it can work, but I don't use it anymore because it's, every time I hit somebody, I want to have it to be a potential chance to end the fight. I don't want to just keep annoying him with this hit that doesn't actually knock him out. So the technique does work, it's just that it's limiting in terms of power. And other than that, in the kick, it's fun, there's nothing to talk about that. And then comes back to the shutting hand. So the way that the Ma family, at least my teacher taught me, right, the one way of using it is to go here and then try to push it off balance. That I do find pretty not useful, because I push it off balance and you're gonna recuperate and come back. It doesn't end the fight. I don't like to use things that isn't gonna end the fight. So if I'm gonna do something, I'd rather come here and punch really hard on the ribs, and that potentially could knock the wind out of him, and he doesn't want to fight. But doing something that's just kind of sort of pushing off balance. So that's my problem with this technique. But maybe other lineage do something else that's more efficient, then that's good. But in the lineage I learned, I don't really like to use this for this reason. Second of all, other method, right, where I step back and I grab you. This in itself looks like a good technique, and I have in my past successfully used this against people. However, it doesn't always work, right? I mean, something can work sometimes, but I prefer things that work 90% of the time, 80% of the time, right? The more probability, the better. It doesn't always work. Well, I say it's less than 50% of the time, because when two objects on high velocity collide, there's a very big chance it will just bump off each other, right? So for this to work, I have to not cause enough bumps that he actually goes away from me. I have to basically touch him and then grab him. That's the whole thing about Ma family Mantis, that you want to not create momentum sideways, but forward and back. But that's very, very hard. especially when a guy is punching at high velocity, there's a very big chance of you just knocking him out of the way and you have nothing to grab on. And the second thing is, even if you do grab onto it, if he got good refrain, he tenses up immediately, you might not be able to grab him. Right? Again, this kind of works back in the days where they do a solid hard punch, where then it's easier to grab. But in the modern day context, it's very hard, which is why the technique isn't wrong, it's just that it's kind of outdated. So obviously the same goes for this, right? If you can't grab someone, these techniques doesn't work. The next one is low show and the punch to heel. This is one technique that actually can work, but here's an interesting thing. When I do it, I actually prefer to hit the front part around the wrist of the person. But in the actual Mantis style, they want to hit the elbow. Okay, the reason for that is because they want to punch, I want to control here and punch him so that he doesn't elbow me. Right? The general idea is that if he punches and I control here, he can just turn around and elbow me. So in the proper Mantis lineage that I've learned, they want to do it here and punch. The reason I prefer to do it here is because it's easier to upset his balance due to the simple physics of leverage, right? So the further I am from his center mass, the more leverage I have. So over here, I can affect his balance less. So this is like a personal preference for me. That's why when I do it, I want to be here so that he unbalances so I can punch him. And I mean, during that, do you think I can actually elbow him?
No.
Right, that's just the game, right? So it's like that, right? And then I'll prefer to punch him this way. So that is my preference. So that's why if you look at my video in the last one, I didn't block him on the elbow because I prefer to have this leverage. But this comes from internal style, like Yi Quan Tai Chi, Wu Xing Tong Bei. It's not a Mantis inherited ability. But this itself can work. The problem with the elbow thing, right, is that if he punches me and I control the elbow, again this works well if the guy is not in the habit of pulling the punch back. But if he's again doing like boxing style, then I'm gonna do this and then I'm not gonna be able to grab onto anything. Right? Even though my personal approach is not easy either, but it's better because the moment I get hold of this, right, to do a regular punch, right, then there's a chance where his arm not gonna go back. But if I simply just wanna control the elbow, then there's a higher chance of him being able to pull back and a punch with the other hand. So again, this technique, it works, it's just that it doesn't work as well anymore in the context, right? It works back in the days where people do hard punches, but in nowadays where everyone punches this way, then it's not as good. So the next one, goes here, block. And then that, I actually like this technique a lot because it's so funky and cool. And when on the receiving end, right, when my teacher first did it to me, this whole thing makes you really disorientated, so the punch you completely can't see, and you can't really see this. So that technique actually works well if you can get to him. If I actually grab somebody and I do this to him, the race will almost be unavoidable. The problem, however, is to get there. It has the same problem as the previous example, right? When I block here and punch there, if he's pushing too far, it's very hard for me to grab back. And when he's bouncing it off, then I don't have anything to grab. It only works when I have a very perfect contact, which is very unlikely to happen in real life. Which is this kind of technique that looks really nice. It feels nice when you do it in practice. When you actually try to do it against people who take the punch in the face, and most likely it's not going to work. And that's a big thing about the Mantis that I've learned. A lot of techniques, it's good in theory, but when you try to put it to practice, it kind of doesn't work. And then the teacher will just say, you just need to practice more. But in my personal opinion, no matter how much you practice, you can't really change some of the basic limitations. For example, how short a time span you have to establish contact and to grab him, versus how much force he's generating, and how the nature of physics dictates that when two objects of high velocity collide, they tend to bounce off. And these limitations, I don't think practice is going to solve. So that's the problem with it. Obviously, people could say that when I do this, if you punch too much that way, then I'm gonna try to do wave slash or some other technique. Now that is a valid argument, right? But the problem is, we have so many different solutions, it's very hard for your mind to react to the correct one. Which is why I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it's just so much more effort if you can pull it off, versus a much more easy and more fail-safe approach where I'm just going to punch him rather than worrying about loading up 1, 2, 3, 4. And just notice, statistically speaking, these stuff have less chance of succeeding than if I just come out to a guy like boxing and just punch him. And if the punch misses, I just pull back and I'll try to punch it again, rather than trying to fold up on the fact that I can control this hand, he's not putting it back, and then I'm punching him here, and he's either doing it this way, and when he's doing that way, I have to make sure that he doesn't pull me downwards, because then if he does that, then this doesn't work. Like, there's so many things that can go wrong, and you have to account for every possibility during this. But what if he doesn't even do this? Then all these possibilities that you prepare for is void. So you have to prepare maybe 20 different plans for that one moment. And that's too much work. Most of our brains will not be able to handle that. And that's why I talk about Occam's razor. But there's too much complexity going on compared to if he punches me, I'm going to duck and punch him. And if I miss, I'm going to duck again, and I'm going to try a different angle. Just much more success rates when I fight like this than the fight styles that are based on one after another, and every move needs to succeed before the final execution. That's the big problem here. So after this, there, and then kick, punch, not much to talk about here, and then turn around, this block, kick. So this, again, it can work, there's nothing wrong with it. If somebody kicks you, you can pick this up and rotate it to the side, and then kick in the butt. It's going to work. Just personally, I don't like to do that. I prefer to, we can prefer to do it that way. When going upwards, you have to handle the weight of his leg, which is kind of heavy, and sometimes you kind of struggle. Whereas if I'm doing this way, then I don't have to deal with that at all. It's the personal preference. This kind of it does work, so you can do that. And this, it kind of that does work. Although I don't really use it, but there's nothing really wrong with it. If somebody punches you, you can definitely do this and kick in the balls or solar plexus. And I'll come back here. Okay, the next part. This. So this is a big thing in Mantis. Okay. A lot of Mantis techniques, in fact, you can say that the most characteristic Mantis, at least the one I've learned, evolved on a very similar principle to this. Right, so firstly, the problem is the double seating hand. Right? When he punches, you do this, and then go for either the neck or the punch. It doesn't really matter what the attack is. So this is called double seating hand. You tap once and you tap twice. Again, this works when you're doing a very hard punch, like in the traditional Chinese martial art way, where if you go a punch like that, like in Baji, right? Or Beng Quan from Xing Yi, or any of the old school punches, this works. And use both hands because this punch, assuming is quite hard and strong, sometimes using one hand is hard to move out of the way, which is why we have both hands to pull it to the side and then follow up with this. Naturally, you should know by now the problem with that is people don't really punch like that anymore. Again, a faster punch like in boxing, you don't have time to do the double tap. So it's kind of outdated in that regard. So it goes for this kind of double seating hand, same with the vertical one where you do this. All of these are designed when people used to punch hard and don't pull back as much. In today's world, I mean, again, if you catch some of these hard cross, you can make it work, but there's much less of that happening rather than fast punches that you can't really catch up to the speed of. That's the second thing. You expect the guy to block you, and then 踩手, right? Catch or 掠手, catch his hand here, and then follow up with a second strike. I just think this is a very great technique because when my teacher demonstrated to me, I was like, wow, once this happens, it's very hard to block this punch. But the problem here again, right, if we really talk about it, you kind of have to make sure that his block is kind of ideal for me to do this. If he's pushing too much that way, then sometimes when I do this, I kind of catch myself in a lock here, and I can't even pull my hand out. And if he just taps it, then sometimes I kind of miss. It's hard to grab this. A lot of time, at least this block is very ideal. You can't guarantee that I'm gonna be able to grab this. And of course, when he's not holding out this hand here, right? So when he's not like this, when he's putting it back, then even if I grab this, then his other hand is still going to do something. I'm not actually effectively controlling this. So this kind of technique, it kind of works when it's in this particular setup. His arm is here, this is there, and this kind of works. But if you go to a box and ask him to give you just random punches, this probably will not work. And that's a big thing. And obviously, when this doesn't work, then the next one where he blocks here, and I do it this way, it wouldn't work either. And naturally, the next continuation where he blocks here, I pull it apart and punch him, it's even less chance of it working, because this is assuming that when I do this, both his arms inactive allow me to push open and punch. But in reality, even if he punched me and I did this, you're gonna do stuff, right? You're not gonna stay there wait for me to pull you. Even if I try to pull you immediately after this, you're either gonna do something, you're gonna punch me, you're gonna stay active. But in this kind of application, they assume that when I'm doing this, the person end is inactive, and that allows me to push open and punch it. So this technique in itself is really very impractical. And overall, right, this comes to the important point of this video. That in Mantis, a lot of these techniques require a setup. Now the first one needs to work. This one needs to block just fine for me to set up and do a nice hook to his temple or to his jaw or wherever. So this is like, if you have a set of dice, and you have to roll it 3 times, and every time have a higher number in order for you to win. So the combo needs to all work out. However, with stuff like boxing and internal martial arts, it's like I can throw the dice 3 times, but each time I count individually. If I have 1 high number, I'm going to hit you. But Mantis, I have to throw 3 high numbers in a row for this technique to work. And based on Occam's razor, we can know that when there's something more complicated like that, it is less likely to work. Because more things can go wrong. Things can go wrong on the first combo. Things can go wrong on the second combo. And when both goes wrong, you don't really have a place to work for. You have to kind of restart. Whereas if I come in with a boxing mentality, right? If I do a jab and a cross, it doesn't really matter. If I succeed, it's good. If I don't, I'm just pulling back. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to try to go here and go there. Every hit is its own individual dice roll. If that may make sense. Every time I'm doing a punch, I'm rolling a dice individually, and if you succeed, I punch. And obviously I have combos, like I'll do here, there, and then try to hook. But still, each of these punches can work by themselves. But in Mantis, I kind of need this to work, for this to work, for this to work, for this to work. If any other time any of these fails, then it doesn't work. And this isn't the only technique, right? These kind of both up is something that Mantis is very known for. It's like I think when I'm here, there, I'm going to try to grab him and then break his or attack his joint and come back and poke his eyes. Things like this too. It doesn't work when the first few moves fails. Or stuff like some of the China stuff that people do. Here, there, I'm going to try to grab him here, hold him there, and then punch him in the face. And then when he blocks that punch, I'm going to come here and then yank him. Right? It has these very elaborate looking techniques that look very smart and looks very cool. But when you're actually facing somebody who's proficient at throwing punches at you, it kind of falls apart. Well, the next move is here. I just think this move is very good too, because when you set punches, you're going to grab him here. When you think you're joint locking him, he's going to resist here, and just follow up and knee him. And I think this can still work in some cases, but the problem is the first setup. It's very hard to catch somebody's arm like this. Again, if the guy's doing those old school punches, it's easy. But in the modern day, where they throw punch, where they pull back, it's actually very hard to do that. And in fact, you handle it quite risky, because if he's putting his elbow back, he will hit you real hard on your palm, and it can actually cause damage to your bone, because the bone here is quite small compared to an elbow bone. So yeah, it's actually harder to catch somebody like this. And if you don't catch somebody like that, then the technique kind of doesn't work. I mean, you can sort of just, forcefully comes in and then knee the guy. But then, it's just the same as the Muay Thai style, right? It's not really unique to Mantis. The Mantis way is required to do a setup, but the setup itself is very hard to happen. But again, just because you can't just push your way through and do a knee, so this technique isn't completely bad. It's just that you kind of have to ignore the setup and just look at the most fundamental knee strike. But if you do Mantis in this kind of mindset, you pretty much end up with just doing modern combat sport. Because everything that you need to Mantis, at least most of it, kind of requires setup that doesn't really work in this modern context. From here, then it's here, right? So this to blocking a hook, I used to do quite a bit because it's a solid way to stop a hook compared to doing it this way or doing it with one hand. So this is a good way to block a hook. The problem is, if a guy continuously hit you with the other hand, it kind of, so if a guy does this to you, then you lose the initiative, right? In this technique, you want to do this and then punch him here. But if he's actually setting up the hook already, then he's actually going to punch through your hand and hit you in the jaw. But unless you just do this all the time, so I don't prefer this kind of approach anymore. We kind of put you on the defensive, right? But assuming that he only does one hook, then this can work. And then you hold for that hand and you grab it. Again, the grabbing has a problem. But if you can grab, then this punch can work too. So it's not completely bad, but it's just again, it kind of requires things to go right for this thing to really work out. Whereas nowadays, if somebody that does a hook, I just want to do this and punch me in the face at the same time. That'd be one of my modern approach, or like in Tong Bei, right? Something I'm still training for, but as soon as I do a hook, I just do this, and then because I told his body so much, that hand is not going to be a threat. So that kind of personal preference for me now. Or like in each, right? If I'm here, somebody do a hook, I'm just going to stop by controlling both hands and pull him and then punch him. Like that. So I think all of these are better than this type of approach. Next is again double sitting hand and a punch, and I think we don't need to expand any more. Same as previously, and this, right? This is a good example of something that's really hard to pull off. Because first of all, I need him to punch, and I have to basically do the punch like this and still remain contact, right? If I'm doing this too quickly, then I don't really have control over this limb. So in the technique that I was taught, it's called nian shou, I think. So it's like sticking hand. You don't want to bounce him off. You want him to be sticking on here so that you can do this and still control here. And then when he blocks that, then you pull him out the way and then following the inner gate, elbow him and then trip him at the same time. But I keep saying, object at high velocity tend to bounce off each other. There's a higher chance of him bouncing off than sticking on. Again, with stick on, if you bring a real hard vertical punch, like the vertex is very strong, if he's just holding straight like tension here, then it's easy to do something like this because he's fighting against that change. But if you just do like a fast punch, then you can't control this. And if you can't control this, you can't really go in and do the rest because that punch is going to come back again. It's not safe to do the rest unless you control him. And of course, you maybe can say you want to do it this way, you can maybe grab it and do it. But the same thing, right? Even though this allows you more control, but grabbing somebody's hand is actually very hard. If you fight against a pro boxer, you know that it's very hard to actually grab anything. You just keep pounding, you control distance, change angles, up, down, left, right. So personally, I don't believe this is very practical. And obviously, again, right, the same problem, Occam's razor, this had to work. This he had to, be working so that I can actually control this. If he does like a circular block, then then you kind of stuffed. And if he goes from the other way, like in Bangshou, you also kind of have. You can still grab here, but then he might distract you there. If he does wing chun, there's a lot of things that can go wrong for this technique to really work. And again, right, you can make solutions for each of the scenario. But if that's what you're doing, with over 100 different scenarios, or at least 10 for this one technique. But what if you didn't have a chance to pull off this technique? Something I talked about previously, right? The master key. If you have one key for every situation, eventually you're going to get lost and forget which key opens which lock. In combat, the successful ones like boxing, MMA, or internal martial arts, instead of trying to have a solution for every problem, they have a general solution, right? Boxing works because it's just a few punches that you change angle and direction and pace and combination. You don't have a specific different move like if he does it this way, I'm going to do it this way, and he blocks it regular, and do this. If he do it the other way, I'm going to have to do something else. It's very hard to keep everything in track, which is why if you look at all these famous Mantis monsters, you don't see them go and fight modern stand-up people or boxers. And when they do, you see that they'll do something similar to modern combat sport. You don't see this elaborate technique when you actually fight somebody who knows how to fight. Or here, the next one is here, kick. In itself, it looks fun, but here's the problem. We need to be close enough for me to do a block this way. If I lift the leg and he steps in, you actually don't have the kicking range. This kind of only works if I'm stepping back and doing a kick, or if I'm blocking and he's stepping back already and I'm following with a kick. So again, it's not like it doesn't work, but it's very specific. And I just don't think that it's something that you really, kind of have to practice for, right? All of these things, using the fight, you have to actually practice them a lot of times. And in doing so, you are building muscle memory and a specific solution. Whereas if you do boxing, you're building a general muscle memory that can work in all kinds of situations. The next thing from here, that, well, this is actually something that can work because it's actually quite raw, it's quite crude. All I do is, I either grab him this way or I grab him that way and I do a peek to the head. Obviously, grabbing is not always going to work if people are putting back the punches, but however, if I'm just doing this, even if I don't catch the hand, I'm still preventing him from doing anything else during this period because this basically cut down everything. If I do this fast enough, okay, don't punch, right? At least he can't punch me during this time. He can step back, but at least during this period, I'm safe. So this is actually one of the things that actually does work. But obviously, it's more ideal if you have to create power in this peak. If you don't know how to peak with proper relaxing force, then this might not be the best thing because you actually don't really do much damage to the other guy. Also, where you hit is quite important. If you hit somewhere wrong, you might actually end up injuring your arm or your wrist. But as a technique, this can definitely work. And ideally, if I catch him there and hit him there, that's the most ideal situation. Here, next one is there, there, and there. So the first part, again, is 1, 2, which, like everything else, is designed for people who does hard punches back in the days. In modern day situation, it's kind of harder, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen. This is one that actually have a chance of happening because this hand is actually quite small. It's not like this. So there is a good chance where you can do this and do the punch. But obviously, you need to have some kind of spiral force to break his balance, right? If it's just there, then he's pulling it back, then it might not affect him well. But if he's doing that, then there's a better chance of this working. And the next one, so here, there, and this kind of works because again, it's quite crude. I don't really care what he does. I just have to do this blindly. If I catch the first hand, I'm just gonna do this, and overwhelm him. And hopefully that while he's looking at here, he don't see this punch. So this is actually a technique that I think does work. But if you look at it fundamentally, it's very similar just to going up, down, and punch. Right? It's not spatial like Mantis. You don't grab onto things and try to do clever technique. It's just raw punching. And you change your angle from up, middle, down. Another slight problem, of course, is that downwards punch. Right? In the form, it's here, there, and there. And this kind of punch is kind of weak. I mean, obviously, if you punch in the solar plexus, then it has to be that strong. If you catch in the roof, also. But personally, coming from an internal martial art background now, I kind of look at how much body mechanics you can deliver into a punch. And when Mantis does this, it's kind of not that good because you don't really use the rest of the body. I mean, some people might argue that when you land, you're using your weight. But if you compare it to Xing Yi and Wu Xing Tong Bei, where the punch is literally coming from the entire body rotating, then you can see that why I think this punch, the way they do it, is not as powerful. But this is again just a personal preference, right? The technique itself I think can work, but my personal preference, I prefer something stronger that if I hit him, I'm going to completely stop him from carrying on the fight. Alright, so from here I think you should have a fairly good idea of why I think Mantis isn't as good as the internal style that I came up with, such as Yi Quan or Tai Chi and Wu Xing Tong Bei. It's because I believe, at least from my experience, I don't want to set things up. I want to come up to a guy, every time I touch him, I'm going to break his balance, or I'm going to hit him really hard. Let's go back to the Yi Quan example, right? Whether he's in this position, I'm just coming up and doing this, I break his balance and I punch him, or if he's doing a punch, I'm still doing this, and I'm still punching him that way. So I'm doing the same thing no matter what he's doing. And if I come here and he's doing like a hook, I still don't have to chain. I just go here and I'm still gonna punch him that way. It's just much easier because I don't have to adapt to what he's doing. Go in and apply it. Whereas in Mantis, you're gonna catch him here, and hopefully he blocks there, and then grab that. We're gonna do this. Hopefully he grabs that, and I can grab this, and I punch him. And hopefully he does this instead of this, so that I can grab him here, or he does that. Hopefully he pushes further enough so I can catch the elbow, and then try to throw him off balance. And hopefully that while I'm doing this, he isn't doing some bagua technique by turning around and trying to hit me from the other side. Like there's so many more things that can go wrong when you're trying to set up a combo that is based on the success of the previous move. Whereas internal martial arts, similar to boxing, every hit is its own hit. I'm going to come in, if I don't, okay, so here's the confusion, right? You might think, okay, but in Yi Quan, you also based on the fact that I have to break his balance and then punch him. Yes, but the thing is, if I don't break the balance, I'm not trapped in a specific setup. I can just carry on breaking his balance and reacting to his moves, and that's what a push hand is supposed to train. When you're doing this, you're really training in a different scenario of the position of your hand and how you can break his balance. So if I'm here and I break his and it doesn't work, right? So I'm going to feel this and I'm going to turn him around and still punch him. So what is still, I'm only punching him after I break his balance, but the breaking balance itself is quite general. I don't even have a plan in my head. All I have to do is just feel where his arm is. If my arm is here, I'm going to go this way. If he goes up, I'm going to go this way. And then when he's going forward, I'm going to spin that way. Or if my arm is here, I'm going to try to go this way. And anytime I get opening, I can punch however I want. And that's why it's easier to pull things off like this than than having these intricate setups that you have to do. And of course, Wu Xing Tong Bei is another example. For example, if I'm going to do a circular hand, I don't really care what he does. The moment he does something, but don't do anything yet. The moment he's coming in range, and stop there. The moment he does something, I'm going to go this. Whether he's doing it with this hand, whether he's doing it with that hand, like I don't really care. And if he's not doing anything, I'm going to slap him in the face. It's one move that I can just keep spamming at him without caring about what he's doing. And when I meet resistance, it's in the natural flow of this move to spin around and carry on. But if I don't get that, if I didn't get that control, see, he can't do stuff to me during that period, right? I'm not vulnerable during this period because this is covering up all the range. And so basically I can do this, and if I'm unsuccessful, I can do the next move. I'm not dedicated. It's not like here, if I'm doing this and I didn't catch that hand, he can throw punches at me and I'm like vulnerable. In this case, I'm not actually vulnerable. And I can either repeat this again, obviously, or I can be here and then do another move this way. But everything I do, I don't really care about what he's doing. Every move is designed to work almost in any situation. And that's why, in my opinion, internal martial art like Wu Xing Tong Bei, Yi Quan, and Tai Chi is more similar to boxing. Not exactly like boxing, but it's more similar in the sense that you can't just expect your own technique to work. You don't have to rely on a specific response from the opponent. Right, anything you want to add?
No, that's it.
Right, so I hope this has made sense to you, and I hope that from now on you can also use the concept of Occam's razor, look at any application you see on YouTube and internet, and ask yourself how complicated is the solution, and how many things can go wrong within this specific setup. And hopefully slowly by using this kind of logical analysis, you can also start to see what technique works and what technique doesn't work. And by work and not work, I mean that a higher chance and less chance. Of course, any technique, no matter how bad it is, it can work on somebody really bad. But you have to also ask yourself, does it work on somebody that is proficient? Right? That's the level you should aim for. You shouldn't say, you know what, I can do technique to my students. Yeah, you can do anything to your student. You can like spin 360 and kick it, right? But can you do it to someone you don't know who is a decent boxer? That's the question that you should ask yourself. And the answer is no. Then there are two possibilities. Either you haven't trained enough, or the technique itself is not that great. And you kind of need experience to be able to tell which one it is, and then deal with it accordingly. Whether either train better and train harder, or move on to a more proficient type of combat system. So hopefully this all makes sense to you. And thanks for watching TriEssence martial art channel. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe on my YouTube channel. Make sure to click on the bell icon so you can get updated as soon as I make new content. And if you can support me on Patreon, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, I'd like to give a shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for supporting me through this pandemic. And always feel free to contact me with any questions about current content and suggestions for future content. And lastly, we are still under pandemic. There are still countries like India and Turkey that's going into lockdown again. So don't think this is behind us. Get vaccinated if you can, and still wear your mask and social distance if you can. It's still very important for everyone to do this in order to stop this pandemic eventually. So again, thanks for watching. Keep safe, keep healthy, and I'll see you next time.